Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome back to day two of the Digital Transformation Summit presented by Internet and Mobile Association of India and Accenture. Before starting off with the session, I would like to quickly thank our partners, our title partner, Accenture, our track partner, Automation Anywhere, our cloud communication partner, Root Mobile, and our bronze partner, Tata Teleservices. Let us quickly jump into the next session. This session is a panel discussion on the topic Employer-Employee Relations, a shifting scope. And for the same, I would like to welcome our esteemed guests, our moderator, Ester Martinez, CEO and Editor-in-Chief People Matters, and our panelists, Mr. Sirish Reddi, co-founder Voxta, Mr. Anish Sarkar, Chief Executive Officer, Sodexo BRS India, Ms. Pratima Pinto Thomas, Head HR Fino Payments Bank, and Ms. Maya John, Chief People Officer, Verse Innovation. Thank you all of you for joining in today. I would now request Esther to please take over.
Wonderful. Thank you. Thanks, Garima, and good afternoon, good evening, good morning, depending on where you're joining us around the world. And it's a pleasure to have our panelists today on a conversation that I think is very, very at the core of business transformation at this moment. Because if you look at the pandemic, it has truly been a human crisis, and it's truly, really tested us on how do we reimagine the way we work. And we had to do that overnight, as you know. And we are still struggling to figure out what is that relationship between employee and employer. And I think I'm an optimist, so I always see it as a silver lining to really redefine maybe something that many of us will consider as broken, to be very honest. So we have the opportunity today to actually redesign and redefine that relationship. So the structure we're going to follow today, we've picked up 4 areas that we felt were relevant, and each one of our panelists is going to go a little deeper in each one of those areas. But we want to make sure this panel discussion is as relevant to all of you. So I will invite you to share questions as we go along, because that's the beauty of doing these sessions live, that we get the opportunity to get your voice and get your questions answers. And I'm not going to take them at the end. Purposefully, we're going to take them as we go along. So do feel free to keep sharing it with all of us. All right, so let's start with the first question, and first inviting maybe Maya, Sirish, Anish, Pratima on that order. Quick hello and how you feeling today? Maya.
Hi, Esther. Thank you. It's really a pleasure to take out 40 minutes for this. The look and the view is not representative of my normal day, but it's nice to be here. Looking forward to the discussion and hopefully sharing some insights from the world all of us are in and from our context of our organizations. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks, Maya. Sirish, how are you feeling today?
I'm feeling very well, thank you. And so thank you for asking me, and happy to be with the rest of the panelists, and hope to have a good discussion with the questions afterwards.
Wonderful. Thanks, Sirish. Anish, good afternoon.
Yes, good afternoon. Sometimes I just wonder, time's such a blur nowadays, whether it's afternoon, morning, evening, night. But yes, it's afternoon now for most of us. No, I'm excited about the session. I think digital transformation as a topic is, of course, hugely important. And while we're talking about the employer-employee relationship, I think digital is very much a part of the solution, and looking forward to the discussion. Looking forward to a lot of questions from the audience, I think.
Awesome. Thank you. Thanks, Anish. Pratima.
Hi, good afternoon, everyone. I'm Pratima, and I'm really excited to be here, probably give and take as much back to my organization from the esteemed panelists and from the audience, whatever possible.
Awesome. Wonderful. So thank you, 4 of you, for taking time. As Maya was saying, that's probably in the middle of 3,000 million things that we are all doing. So you are taking time to be with us. All of you who are listening are taking time to invest in your own learning and find solutions for your current challenges. So I think we're looking really forward to this conversation. All right, so Anish, let's start with the first pillar of our conversation, which is really about what is wrong with the employer-employee relationship, and why do we need to shift scope? What is it that we have as an opportunity to change that relationship, and why is it so urgent? So let's quickly set the context of what we need to fix and why we need to fix it.
Thank you, Esther, for the question. I think just before jumping into addressing that, you mentioned a very important point in your opening remarks, that This is a human crisis. And I think more than anything else, this crisis has brought each of us, closer to ourselves as human beings in good, but of course, not so good ways as well. And never has the quality of life been so important to each of us, right? I mean, we are cherishing this additional time we are spending at home with family, but worrying about our near and dear who may be far away or who may be close to us, but impacted by this crisis. We're realizing more and more the importance of hygiene factors in our lives, right? Literally and otherwise. We miss travel, we miss our holidays, but we're still appreciating the cleaner air and the chirping of the birds that we start to hear in the concrete jungles that we live in, right? And we've understood that there are more important things in life than work, like health and well-being and mental well-being, for example. But at the same time, all of us are so much more anxious about our futures in the face of so much of adversity and uncertainty, right? So yes, there is a silver lining, but we are in the midst of unprecedented times. Coming to the question on the relationship between the employer and the employee, I think let me spend a couple of minutes just first trying to define the elements of that relationship, right? Let's start with the physical relationship and let's talk pre-COVID times. Almost all of us identify or used to identify our organization or company by its physical presence, the office, the factory, our individual desk, workspace, the coffee machine, the reception, maybe even the bathroom. Then there's the emotional aspect. Of course, it's impossible not to be emotionally connected with your company, right? Because it's such an important part of our lives. And a major part of that emotional connect is to do with the people we work with. Obviously, it's the alternate family for each of us. And I dare say that many of us used to spend more time with that family than the family at home, certainly pre-COVID. And then there's the behavioral aspect of this relationship, which is pretty much the way we work, the ways of working, our daily tasks, our daily deliverables, working and collaborating with our teams, managing time, performance management, rewards and recognition, work-life balance, and all of that. Now, these are the three elements of the relationship. Not to say that nothing was broken pre-COVID, but I think we live in a completely changed world. So let's talk about how it's broken today. Because we are in the middle of a pandemic, which, is a crisis that refuses to go away, right? And it's, we're experiencing probably the worst part of the crisis here in India as we speak. Many of us haven't seen our workplaces for several months, maybe over a year in many cases. So that physical relationship or the physical part of the relationship is largely broken at the moment, or at least interrupted. What about the people we work with? I think we can all agree that, connecting on Teams or connecting virtually or over video isn't the same as sitting in a room, having a coffee, having a meeting, maybe arguing over some business topic. With some colleagues, I think, maybe we're very happy to be, meeting only virtually, but I think more and more people are feeling that I need to get back. I want to go back and have that physical time. Surprisingly, I hear some people are even happy to be getting back into physical meetings with their bosses even. But that's the nature of the situation today. I would say the last part, the behavioral part of the relationship is probably least impacted because I think most companies have figured out how to continue the business, how to continue working remotely, virtually. Of course, there are challenges there. Decision making is more difficult. It's difficult to resolve arguments or disagreements. Innovation has certainly slowed down, let's be clear. For many businesses, physical operations where they're dependent on physical operations have either stopped or been impacted very severely. And let's face it, most companies have had financial impact, big, small, but they've had it. So this is the situation today. Now, I will just talk about the urgency of fixing this, because I think we'll have the rest of the discussion to talk about ways and means to reimagine it. But I think last year, when the crisis started in February, March, etc., I think as organizations, we all first scrambled to keep our business going. So on business continuity, we started to focus on cutting costs, knowing that, okay, there is some uncertainty, revenues have slowed down, blah, blah, blah. And for those who hadn't already done it or who had the opportunity to do it, we focused on digitalizing our business model, knowing that we will not be able to operate physically. Focus on employee, not the first priority, probably not the first 5 priorities. Now, several months have gone by. I think organizations have realized that this is not a short-term disruption. This is here to stay. It's the new normal, right? And I think this is why it's never been more urgent to focus on the employee. And I'm already seeing that happening. Even with my clients, I see more and more in the last few months coming back to us and saying, okay, now this is for me the new normal. I think we are all now coming to terms with the so-called work from anywhere workforce. And companies are starting to think, or employees are starting to think, how do I engage my employee? What can I do for them? How can I enable them to work better from home? How can I focus on their well-being? How can I keep them motivated? How can I keep them productive? And so on. And I think this is the point I was making at the beginning, coming back to the theme of the topic. Those who've invested in digital employee experience, digital employee engagement, digital benefits, they are well ahead of the curve, but others are clearly struggling. And I think, just to summarize this and to set the stage, I think reimagining this relationship, in my view, is absolutely critical going ahead for the long-term performance and resilience of every single organization. Back to you,
Thanks.
Esther.
Thank you so much, Anish. And I think you've set the foundation for Maya to come in and say, okay, how do we really look at reimagining this relationship? What are the different dimensions? And there is a question from the audience as well. I'm going to add in, Maya, for you here. Especially, how do we do that when we have employees who've joined us during the pandemic? And, that's a reality. They haven't even seen the physical element that Anish was talking about. So how do we reimagine that relationship? And then if you double click a little bit deeper in saying, how do we do that, especially with new joinees?
Sure, Esther. And Anish, adding on to a couple of things. So employers and employees have been together even before COVID, right? So it's a spectrum. I mean, it's a continuum. So what I've observed is the last 1 year, at least from an India context, since we've all gone into work from home, companies have really, the true DNA of a company has come out, because you don't have the buffer of a fancy campus and facilities and a humongous cafeteria and all of that. So it's come back to basics. What does this company really stand for? Do they really value people or not? So I think this has been a bit of a reckoning of, hey, let's take out all the layers, right? And just come to, what the company stands for. So that is one, and that is a contextual reality. So companies that are faring better than others are those that fundamentally valued people and fundamentally focused on people. Because you can't just wake up one day and just say all the right things, right? Your employees know you. So if you don't stand for what you're saying, they can read through that. So that's one. So I just wanted to say that there's nothing called just for now, for the moment. It's a continuum, even post-COVID, and hope there is a phase like that that relationship continues. But there's been some 2 or 3 very significant call outs to that relationship. So it was always the entity, the employee as a singular entity, right? So the employee is in office or in your team or in your organization, and you are doing your best to enable them for their growth. Now, it's not a singular, it's a composite. So you have the employee, you have the partner or the spouse. If you have children, then you have children in the mix. Parents, in an India context, in-laws, live-in help, home nurses, you name it, right? So there is a composite now that has come into the whole equation of the employee, just not a singular. The second is, the personal world of the employee and is kind of rolling into the professional world. So, the pressure cooker whistles, kids chattering in the background, car horns, the whole reality of where they, their existence in a personal space is very visible. I mean, through these, boxes that we interact now with each other. So that's the other thing. And the third is, this squishy thing called empathy, right? It has become a necessity, because unless you understand the context of the employee, and you are trying as an organization to marry the fact that you need to get to your results and your deliverables, and you need to enable the employee holistically, as I said, not the singular, but the composite, then empathy is a necessity. You can't operate, without that. And so I would just summarize that it's just now come down to basics. The relationship is on basics. Are you taking care of me, my family, my job, my salary? And is this company in it for the long run? So if if my basics are clear, then I can deal with all the other things that I need to, do all of that, in my life. So yes.
Wonderful. Thank you, Maya. And I'm going to come to you very soon. I think once we finish the first round to reflect deeper onto, basics are normally in many times the most complex ones. And we love to understand a little bit. Yeah, go ahead.
Yes. Esther, sorry, I forgot to address the question that you had put up from one of our audience members.
The new joinees, absolutely. Sorry.
So if I give a Versailles context, we've had about 550 employees join us in the last 1 year. They haven't met anybody physically. They haven't come to the office. They haven't felt the company for what it is, right? The small conversations, the chai coffee breaks, the sutta breaks, and all that. That's a basic part of us, being a company in Bangalore and Koramangala. So what I would say is that it needs a much extra effort because you need to first connect personally, and that warmth has to be felt through interactions, through conversations. And then that warmth has to translate into actions, because the only way they are assessing a company is through your actions, because there's nothing else to add on to that flavor, that color, as you call it. So, so we've taken a lot of extra effort. So we have, our employees are spread across, the new hires are spread across at least 20 states in the country. And, we do different things to connect with them, see how they're doing, how their family is doing. As I said, that's a big piece now of the entire equation, a composite. Yeah. So I would just say it takes a lot of effort and time, but it's worth it because they are part of your family, and you need to take that extra effort.
Wonderful. Thank you, Maya.
Yes.
And probably as a leader and as a business leader, you would have thought that you will have 500 people joining you from different cities. If you had that, probably the mindset that we're based in Bangalore.
Yes.
And you kind of need to join in Bangalore.
Actually, it's not 500.
So that's a silver lining, right?
It's about 4 times that, right? It's
okay.
Because
imagine.
It's the whole. Yes.
Imagine. Wonderful. Thank you so much, Maya. So Maya was talking to us about the simple things, and Anish, you were referring to the emotional and behavioral aspect. And I'm going to move into that fleshy thing that's called culture, which is really what I get to experience every day and how I feel I'm treated with my team, with my manager. So Sirish, tell us a little bit about what's the role that culture plays into putting all this together in this relationship.
It's a great question. And I suppose I should just say, well, first of all, thank you both to Maya and Anish for some great comments on the whole situation. I'm not sure that I'm really going to add a lot to what they've said, but hey, let's see. I mean, at the moment, we're actually a very small company comparatively, 20 people. So from a company perspective, the things that Maya was saying, the culture of the company in a sense is shaped by individuals, i.e. the founders and the other people, to some degree by the building. But I think the shift has been now, as she rightly said, it's very personal. You really had to focus in on the relationships, and you also had to try and structure in on how people's relationships are with each other and try and construct that web of relationships and strengthen them, or in some cases, find alternatives because a particular relationship may not be working. Now, how do you do that remotely? Well, that's tough. That's one aspect of culture. But the other aspect, when you're trying to build a culture, we've all been through different organizations, whether it's school or whether it's religious institutions or whether it's, business school and all the companies or groups of people we work with. And even family has a culture. Each family has its own culture. And we've all experienced the culture clash that comes when, two people marry and their families are trying to kind of, accommodate each other and they all, reach different accommodation. I think with this, what we're finding is the family suddenly of the individual and the workplace environment are really coming against each other. And as Maya said, the two have to meld. The two have to come together. And now everyone's family is the variation in people's family backgrounds and their cultures is actually quite significant. And that is, I think, the biggest challenge, because we as a company don't have the luxury now of taking everybody away for a couple of days and helping shape their thinking and their emotions anymore. And that was always the starting point almost in every company or environment I've worked in, where people are trying to get people on board, change the culture to some degree and their habits and their thought processes and the assumptions. You basically try and take them away and into an immersive environment for a while. And that is a very challenging thing to do now because, well, none of these web calls are really particularly immersive, shall we say. And so then you have to look at alternative actions to engage with people, and that on the personal, and that goes beyond the personal, beyond the traditional role of a company. Well, maybe back to the traditional role of a company 100 years ago when you were one of those Quaker companies, when you were much more benevolent, and then you try and look after the complete welfare of the person. And in a sense, I think we almost have to go back to that model. And we have to really seek out where are people in that situation. You had to ask them, how is your extended family? And then push hard to see what help you can give if help is needed, or just simply be there. So culture, I think it's I would argue at an individual level, we all had to figure out what is the mindset we're going to approach the situation with. We've all seen enough, we all know from a textbook perspective how to handle culture, or how to design culture, and at a very large organization or larger groups of people. Well, that's an interesting point of how you make the unstructured happen through structured means. And I very interested to hear how Maya makes those things happen at a large scale level, or Anish for that matter, and then especially Pratima.
Wonderful.
So I think it's challenging.
Yeah, thank you, Sirish. And I love your point about how do we make unstructured things happen in a structured way. And I think that's the struggle, because I think the pre-COVID mindset was, let's just try to plan things, let's try to control things. And what we've all learned during COVID is that really we don't have as much control as we think we had. And Maya spoke about empathy, you spoke about the ability to connect with each other. Anish, you call it the emotional connect. And finally, it all needs to come together, that I feel enabled and I feel I can live a complete life, both at work and at home. And that's the challenge. So I'm gonna take that Sirish point back to all of you in my second round on how we may do that, how we may create a culture where people feel supported, they can be productive, and they also can be living a full life. And I'm just start thinking about how, because we're gonna go one more round. But before we do that, Pratima, when we're looking at this employer-employee relation, the traditional definition of employer is also changing, because we are now a lot more open to bring people into our company in projects or maybe gigs. Even some of our employees may choose to say, listen, I don't want to be an employee anymore, but I would love to be associated with the company. So the definition of employee needs to also change. So what will be your viewpoint on how do we shift the scope of employer-employee relationship, understanding the employee in a lot wider way?
Sure. So I would want to take, an example of the relationship back to a small this thing, where I say the erstwhile or the traditional concept of an employer-employee relationship was more like a parent-child relationship, where the child, where the child enters the organization, or is like a part of the family, and the child grows into his life along with the parent, or the parent supports, and then the child invests back, and there is a lot of give and take through as a child. I would say today you could fix a parent-child relationship with a lot of intervention. It was slightly easier. However, today's relationship is more of a parent and adolescent child, or a parent or a youth, young child kind of a relationship that we have stepped into, or rather we are into. Probably it's because of the social media impact, the freedom that, today's employee wants to experience, the larger community that he wants to get associated to through the social media, the adventurous take that he wants, in his day-to-day work, the recognition that he wants, and not just a reward, which probably a child would look for a reward probably for something that he did. But, a difference between recognition and reward comes in when we see how we try to associate with adolescents. And given the current situation, with mental health, well-being in the work from home scenario, hybrid model, all the more we have been forced to look at different kind of relationships when we call it as an employee. The term employee, I feel, has now been left behind only for the compliance part of it, the compliance of the HR aspects or probably the documentary aspect. Today, he's a partner. And I feel Sirish probably through his experience, the entrepreneurial or any smaller, firms would probably experience that much more, where an employee is a very close associate to the founder or the partner who runs it, who has a stake in everything. And the sooner we realize it and we change our policies, our perspectives, towards engaging them as partners, engaging our employees as our partners, as our stakeholders. We'll be better off in probably working with them, retaining them, and getting them to, invest back into the organization, as I call it. We don't only invest in our employees or rather in our partners, but we want them to invest back into us and stay with us for the longer run. So that definitely then comes in who all are our partners. So when I talk about employee experience or creating a culture, creating an experience for an employee, or I should now move the word to our partners, I would say every stakeholder who comes into my organization is are the people who need to experience the vibes going on around there. Whether he's a gig worker, a freelancer, or probably in the erstwhile traditional language, a freelancer. We hired freelancers, but they were very minimal. Today, the quantum of freelancers is more. And so then we find ways, our policies, our business objectives, our values, our missions probably will need to be aligned to bring all these partners on a table. Whether it is a short-term partnership, a long-term partnership, probably we could differentiate between rewards and recognitions, etc. However, the experience will need to be aligned towards all partners equally. So that, because today there is no, even a short-term partnership could actually be a long-term partnership in the long run. You never know when you would, want that gig worker back again. So that experience that we need to give to him will require to, keep it as engaged as probably we would be doing it for a traditional full-time employee, something like that. For me today, an employee is not just an employee from a compliance perspective, but a person who is associating or, probably even in the smallest ways associating with my organization. He needs to feel the vibes. He needs to feel the experience that we can give him, whether it is short run, long term, so be it. It needs to continue, and the faster we move our policies, our partnership code of conducts, or whatever we may say, towards working towards that, I feel we would be faster in getting there with our relationships.
Wonderful. Thank you. Thanks, Pratima. And I think your closing is really bringing it all together, because we are in a journey of achieving success for our customers, and we need to see everyone in that journey as partners, equal partners to innovate, to really think beyond, to solve problems, and really not to wait for somebody to tell me what to do, but truly somebody who's empowered to look at problems, find solutions, and act on them in the context of the organization. So thank you so much for bringing that as well. So how do we, now I'm going to move into a how. How do we build that culture of partnership? That culture, as Maya, you were talking about, embracing the person as a whole? How do we go back to those basics in a way that it's going to be unstructured? And if we're trying to put structure, again, we're probably going to go back to that father and child relationship. So how do we do that? Anish, and you were also talking about the emotional aspect, which is really what untaps discretionary effort. And we know that. Research has shown that over and above time. So one or two ideas, maybe one way that you have seen, you have done it in your organization, it has helped you. What would that bring? What would that be? And how do you bring it to all of us who are in this call? What is the one or two ways that we may approach this problem? Anybody who wants to start?
I can go.
Go ahead, Anish.
On that, Esther. Yes. I think, and again, as you said, these topics all merge into each other: culture, emotional connect, etc.
Correct.
One specific thing I have seen organizations, we all talk about employee communications. I see a lot of organizations are great at communicating to employees. So a lot of town halls and, newsletters and intranets and blah, blah, blah. I think where organizations lose out is they don't hear back enough from employees. So there is an annual survey, okay, but an annual survey in our times is quite meaningless because it's too spaced out. Something we did at Sodexo, in fact, just before the pandemic, is to implement an AI-based tool for employee feedback. So it's like an ongoing employee feedback tool that tests. So for example, if when there's a new joinee, there's a survey and there's a chat with that employee to understand how he or she is doing. 15 days, 30 days, 60 days, and depending on tenure and all of that. So we found that tool extraordinarily useful, especially during the pandemic, because, it enables us to almost give a real-time feel of what is the pulse of the employees. And to me, this is one thing that I think organizations need to do more, hear more from your employees. It's not just once a year.
And then just
Thank you, Anish.
backing that up for Anish, I mean, I think, so the interesting thing about that is that at one level, we're broadly, I think, in our minds, apart from possibly Pratima, we're talking about highly digitally literate people, whereas there's a vast universe of people who are actually not particularly comfortable with digital means, and any digital communication ultimately for that set of people, first of all, they're not participating that much with that. And secondly, even if they're interacting with it, emotionally, it doesn't have impact. And I think that the challenge then is, what are the alternative mechanisms for getting through to them? At one level, of course, a person-to-person contact is the most fundamental way of getting to someone emotionally, but it's a very costly mechanism, and also it has to be the right person. So you have to find some way of pushing the network through the organization and explicitly, getting, it doesn't make sense. Even if we have 20 people, I know that the emotional response when people talk to me is going to be different from the emotional response they have talking to somebody else within the organization. So it's actually about getting that web going. Now the question is, how do you do that at scale? Is also an interesting point, which we're kind of working on. But going back, but of course we're also in the business of technology, and I think our answer to that for other larger companies is more around, we use voice, because we think voice, like voice bots in Indian languages, have higher potential, and we're actually well, in England, not in India right now, but we're actually being asked to put together a bereavement counseling line, which is kind of the most emotional thing ever possible. And we're also pushing back to saying you can't just automate it, you have to have people as well. It's got to be a blended solution. You can't, and so the interesting point there is there's some level of voice interactivity for monitoring people and touching base with people, but it's always left open that they can actually reach out to be put in touch with a real human being very quickly. So I think that's the, how do you do it at scale? And I think, it has to be done through using some of the new things that are there.
Yeah. So I'm just reminded this morning I had a conversation with a CHRO in Australia, and it's really merging what both of you are talking about. And she was sharing that listening tools and how you can use technology for listening continuously. It's very powerful. But she was saying that at the end of the day, the most powerful hearing tool I have is that I have a group of leaders I speak to across all levels. And I have a conversation with this group of what she called influencers. And she's saying that human conversation I do with that group and those stories can't be replaced with any technology that I know so far. You know, so it's beautiful to hear both of you saying that we need technology, but we really need to go back to basics. So Maya, tell us more how we go back to basics.
Yes. So as you know, especially Anish was speaking, I was just going to say that I'm going to respectfully disagree. So, for example, as a company, we are a very high-tech company, right? We have a regional language platform in India called Daily Hunt, which is the largest in the country. We have about 350 million monthly active users that come there. We have a short format app called Josh, where we have about 90 million youngsters of the country come in, you know, in multiple languages, engaging in multiple languages. But for 2020 and 21, we have very consciously chosen to keep our employee connect extremely low tech. It's very low tech. So there is no gadgets, there is no tech interface, there are no bots, there's no voice, there's people. So there's the HR team, there's the leaders, and there's the founders. And I know, you know, you can question about scaling it, but it has worked, right? So it does take a little extra effort, but one of those conversations is equivalent to probably 10 emails. So we have very consciously chosen. It is very, very tough on the leaders, founders, and the HR team to commit to that, but we have committed. Again, it's 2020 and 2021. In 22, we may, reach out to Anish, and I'd love to get learnings from all the other stuff we're using for engagement. But for now, it's a conscious choice, and that's the route we've taken. And the second piece I feel is authenticity of actions. See, you can put beautiful PPTs and you can do the HR speak and it's all fancy language, but at the end of the day, your employees are observing you, your markets are observing you, the customers are observing you. So if your actions and your say-do ratio, as we used to call it in my earlier organization, GE, if your say-do ratio isn't there, then your credibility just goes. So the other thing that we've been very conscious about is our say-do ratio. So just one example, and I'll move to Pratima after that, is at the beginning of the pandemic, in March 2020, where we didn't know where we were headed, where the market was headed, where our business was headed. And as a startup, we made a commitment that we will not do layoffs. Now, in hindsight, one thinks, oh my God, on what basis does one make a commitment like that? But we did everything. So we gave up offices. We had multiple office buildings. We gave it all up. We had certain infra resources. We gave that up. So we did everything to shelter the employee. Because again, coming down to basics, it's about, do I have a job? Am I in the right company? Do they care about me? And do I get a pay slip, right? Like just coming down to the bare basics. So that's been our approach. Again, we pivot as the times move, but these basics, kind of is our guiding light.
Yeah. Thank you. Thanks, Maya. And I, as I'm hearing you, it resonates that Stephen Covey kind of sentence that he said, go slow to go fast. Sometimes, as you said, that one conversation may look like it takes a long time, but it actually may solve the problem as opposed to those 10 emails. So thank you for sharing that. Maya, there is a question before I come to Pratima. There's a question about some organizations, maybe they did not have the opportunity not to do layoffs. They had to do it, or maybe they chose to do it, or we may not argue about what was the reason, but it happened. Now that affected, of course, the environment, that affected, maybe that broke that relationship of trust in a way. Now, any inputs or advice that you would want to give us to say, well, if that happened, that's part of the past. Now, what do we do today? What is it? How do we rebuild that trust again?
Yeah. No, I think, going back to some of the points that the panelists have said, it's communication. So if you take employees along on the journey, when you are coming to points of really tough decisions that impact them also personally, I'm not saying anybody will be happy to be laid off, but at least there's an understanding that I understand where the organization is headed. I understand the ups and downs that are happening. Again, it's very tough to be fully transparent, right? Because again, there are many moving parts. And so there are some, constraints there as well. But I would say doing anything, I think, with transparency to the extent possible and dignity, right? It's not about you personally, but hey, there is a context to which a tough decision is being made. And I think a couple of things, like small things that help, is keeping in touch, right? So for example, at Verse, we take a family view to this. So even if you're leaving us, we are in touch. So we have, for example, a lot of employees who've rejoined us, right? So I think while in every family as well, you have good and bad times. But I think if the intent is clear that, hey, we are all connected and we will keep each other. And of course, maybe taking an extra effort to help find other opportunities. We had a tough situation where we had made offers to a whole bunch of very bright engineering students. And when it came to time to absorb them, we could not absorb all of them. Now, they have left other opportunities because they have a guaranteed job offer with you, right? So we took it as, okay, this is our responsibility. We can't just say we can't absorb you, figure out your life. Right. So we partnered with a huge ecosystem, and that's a big shout out to so many of the startups that we reached out to. And, we had about 40 startups that we worked with to place these students, and we're still in touch with some of them. Right. So I think it's, people understand, right? There's no bubble that is not affected. But I think if the intent is there and you're in it with them, it sort of helps. I'm not saying everything is hunky-dory, but it is. Yeah.
Wonderful. Thank you. Thanks, Maya. Pratima, one last point. We have another 8 minutes, and I want to make sure we have the final round of closing remarks. What would you suggest us to do to be able to build that culture?
I would say adopt the technology, but do not lose the human touch. And because that's most important. We as an organization, or a fintech organization, we have technology, to reach out to our customers, our partners, and everyone. But during this entire year of the pandemic, one thing that the entire HR team, or rather, in fact, from the leadership, top to bottom, what we encouraged everyone to do is, call and stay in touch with your employees, because we had a whole lot of employees on the field who had to go out every day. Unlike us, who probably were just rostered for some days at office. I was lucky that I could meet my associates physically for many number of days throughout the year too, unlike many of you. But what we took up is, we said, let us call every employee to tell him that, this is the number you call back on, or you fall back on, apart from your manager, and you call us up when you're in need, when you want assistance, when you want somebody to just reach out to or speak to. We said, just call up to us. And that's how we made these small teams. And we did 100% calling to my 3,500 workforce. And we said, here we are sitting for you. So I guess that is something that helped us and worked for us a lot in this entire year.
Wonderful. Thank you. Thanks, Pratima. And I'm staying with you, and I'm going to put the 4 of you on a spot right now, because we had decided that we'll do a round of, one thing to start, one thing to stop, as we rebuild the relationship with our employees. But I see a question from the audience saying, how do you manage accountability and trust? So the two, kind of, sometimes some of us may see it as a dilemma that, if I trust you, will you be accountable? So I'm going to invite you to share, one thing that we can start, one thing we need to stop when we are looking at building trust, and at the same time, not taking the accountability away. So how do we have trust and accountability? What is the one thing we need to start, one thing we need to stop? You can talk about it from leader perspective, yourself as a people leader, or you can talk about it from organizational perspective. I leave it to you. So I'll put you on a spot because you totally were not prepared for these. But I think it's a beautiful question and I don't want to miss it. So who wants to start? The brave, who's going to be the brave one today?
I can go first.
Go
the
ahead.
last thing I said had a lot of reactions, so maybe I can go first. No, I think, and it's just reiterating the point. I think especially in today's time, I think the quality of life has never been more important for all of us, right? What organizations can do is to put the fact that their employees are human beings, front and center at all times. And what does that mean? It means, focusing on their family. What is the company doing for the family? What are they doing for their health and well-being? What kind of flexibility are they offering to the employee? I think more than anything else, this will go towards building trust. We did a survey recently at Sodexo called the Quality of Life Survey. We found that 54% of companies have actually earmarked a budget towards quality of life related activities for their employees. And I'm sure that number is even higher now. So I think that's something they need to start doing. On the point of accountability versus trust, what they can stop. So the other part of the question is, stop focusing on activities. If you focus on outcomes, which honestly, it's surprising that companies even today struggle to do that. I think it helps to bring that balance.
Wonderful.
So that's what I would say. Yes.
Thank you, Anish. Yeah. All right, let's hear the rest of panelists today. Start and stop.
So I think following on from Anish, Sirish. I think his point about a shift from managing activities to focusing on deliverables is fantastic. But I think the backdrop of that has to be, well, one is you have to have the ability to monitor, to kind of establish what are the deliverables, as well as what an outcome, a good or a bad outcome is to some degree, because you need to have a discussion about that. But more equally importantly, though, I think you have to reinforce the social contract you have between the organization or between that group of people, actually. And out of that will flow trust, of course, if that is clear. And of course, as Maya said, the whole say-do thing is a fantastic ratio. I've never heard of it before. But that's fantastic because that establishes trust if that's consistent. It's an enormous challenge for all of us, of course, because I'd much rather tell people what to do than do it.
That's the thing. Pratima, go ahead, and then I'm close with Maya. Go ahead.
I would say I would not want to ask anyone to stop doing something, because it would be, something that may not be applicable to me, but to others. So I'm going to only say what we could start doing, or probably keep continuing to do it if we are already doing it. I would say, when you talk about values or trust or probably the deliverables and the outcomes, one thing that I personally enforce and reinforce from time to time with my teams or with my peers or stakeholders is to explain why something needs to be done. If I am able to convince or get convinced myself on the why, and if I'm able to communicate that to the person, I feel he's able to resonate and he's able to take part in the accountability equally. He's accountable to the trust factor, he's accountable to the value, to the rewards, to everything on place. So I would say push the why and keep continuing. Wonderful. If you have done it, please keep continuing to. If you have not yet, please start.
Wonderful. Thank you. Thanks, Pratima. Maya, one thing to start, one thing to stop. You have 60 seconds.
Okay. So I would say start is, like one of our founders said, never let a good pandemic go to waste, right? Which means that, if you can be a pathway for enabling employees, whether personally or on the work front, do that, either as a professional, as a head of, your function, or as a business leader. So as an example, enabling other partners in the ecosystem to have access to your employees. So for one example is, for mental wellness, we have this beautiful partner called Inner Hour, right? They know what they do best. We just enable them, just connect our employees to them. So leverage the ecosystem. You're not the only one in this situation. Get smart, look around you and enable that, right? That is one. I think one thing is stop following trends just for the sake of it. Understand your employees, your context, your business, and your ecosystem, and do stuff that is relevant. And one thing I would say for us, for example, is we are a very much in-office company. It took a lot from us to go 100% work from home, which we did at about 24-hour notice, right? But we are not saying that we are going to be working from home forever. We have always said we are dying to come back to office. And hence, that may not be the industry cool thing to say, but that's who we are. And that's what we want to remain true to. So I think that's what I would say, stop just following trends for the sake of it. Be relevant for your employees and for the business that you're in.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Maya, Pratima, Sirish, Anish. I think we've covered a lot of ground. It was a very challenging topic. There are no right or wrong answers, but you've brought a lot of new perspectives and a lot of new ways of thinking around the challenge and really looking at it as an opportunity. So thank you very, very much.
Thank you, Esther. Thank you
Thank
to
you.
all the panelists. And personally, I think this session has been the most interactive and so full of knowledge for me as well. And thank you so much for joining in today. And we'll be back with yet another exciting session soon. Thank you so much. Take care.
Thank you. Thanks, everyone.
Bye. Thank you.
Bye, everyone. Thank you.
Safe.